thanks everybody for getting up early and coming in on this rainy Sunday after our reception and everything. I'm sure, methods is not the most stimulating conversation for a Sunday morning, but I'm glad you're all here, and I think that the panel we've got will actually wake us up and make us think differently about local news. So in this panel, we're really aiming to show you different methods of studying local news, many of them grounded in digital. So we're offering insights into text mining, user analytics, qualitative analysis of interviews, and network analysis. And each presentation is going to demonstrate a slightly different approach to ways we can understand local news and local news audiences. Now, I'm changing up the program somewhat, so we're going to begin with Nadine Nakagawa and her presentation on understanding engagement, or how we might understand engagement amongst our local news audiences. And then we're going to hear from Philip Mai and Priya Kumar, thank you, I'm predicting what gets likes on a Facebook page of blog TO and using text mining to do so. I'm going to follow up in the middle with just an overview of 3 different case studies, which will echo the first 2 presentations. And then we're going to hear from David Secco, local journalist of social mobilizers, and his qualitative assessment of local journalism in the Ebola epidemic. I would like to invite Nadine up to the stage to talk about engagement to kick us off. Thank you.
Okay, politics and engagement. So my research focused on engagement as it relates to federal Canadian politics, but I think a lot of what I found out there also relates to local journalism as well. So when we're talking about engagement, we're certainly not talking about the image on the left, but we're talking more about the image on the right, somewhat. There's different ways that researchers have talked about engagement and what is engagement. So for some, it's all activity online is a form of engagement. So even reading blogs, reading things on Facebook or Twitter can be seen as a form of engagement. Participating in discussion platforms, maybe engaging in a Facebook group on a certain issue. For Schuster, it's feminism. Or organizing and attending offline events are seen as more of a flat scale. None is better than the other. For others, it's more of a hierarchy. So consumption, so what we normally think of how people consume media, watching a video or listening to the radio, is more common. It takes less emotional involvement and less energy as well. Contribution, so maybe adding a little bit of something, is seen as higher, and creation is the least common but the most emotionally involved and energetically consuming form of engagement. That could be something like creating your own YouTube video or building a website about a particular issue. For me, I've also created it as a hierarchy in which broadcasting information is the lowest, listening is slightly higher, encouraging offline action is up the hierarchy, and dialogic is the highest form of engagement. So as somebody who is a social media community manager as well, in fact I am and have been several politicians online, none of them myself, usually how we see engagement is likes. How many people see the video or see the picture that you post? How many people click the little heart or the thumbs up button? And in fact, the platforms do promote that. That's how they rank engagement as well. But for my study, broadcasting was providing information. So an example from Justin Trudeau's Twitter feed is great to speak at the hashtag #CanUA forum today. May our countries continue to work together to build strong ties. So not really sure how someone would engage with that to respond or add to that conversation unless perhaps you're at the hashtag #CanUA forum. Don't even know what that means myself. Listening is hard to quantify online because it's often invisible. So if politicians are actually scrolling Twitter feeds or following a particular hashtag, it doesn't have a digital footprint, so it's harder to see. But it could also be soliciting feedback without actually engaging back in dialogue. So I didn't find any examples of this, but something like that could be, call my office and let me know if you need help with this particular issue. Again, encouraging offline action, I didn't find any examples of this. I suspect this would be more common in election cycles. Come to this rally that I've organized, volunteer in your local campaign, or donate money. It takes more, you're asking a lot more of somebody to participate with you that way. And then initiating or participating in dialogue. So from then Conservative leader Rona Ambrose's page, has anyone ever looked at their paycheck and said, I sure wish they'd take more of my money? Not obviously nobody's going to respond back and say, yes, I've said that. But this was part of a bigger discussion on CPP policy reform. And in fact, it did have a lot of replies. People did engage with this in a lot of different ways, agreeing with her, disagreeing with her. So the broadcasting information I've referred to as a form of slacktivism. So slacktivism is online behavior that takes very little effort from people. So sometimes it's signing an online petition or liking an article from, let's say, someone like Human Rights Watch. It's derided as people are not emotionally involved in it. It's cost them very little time, money, effort. But in fact, what politicians are doing is akin to this, that they're just simply pushing out a message. They're using social media as a bulletin board for themselves, in which is unmediated, and they get to speak directly to their followers. But it doesn't actually create, it's not an advantage for constituents in that they simply get to consume message directly from politicians without editorializing by journalists. But it's really benefiting the politicians more. So examples of how this could be different are found more I've seen in the municipal sphere. So Mayor of Calgary, Naheed Nenshi, is very active on Twitter. I know all the dogs who have gone missing in Calgary because of him. He retweets all of them. And you can see that he's asked a question here. It's a little tongue-in-cheek. Well, somebody asked him a question, and he's re-asked the question to the Twitter public. And people have come back fairly tongue-in-cheek. But clearly, you can see there's 22 responses to this question, so people are engaging back with him. From my own municipality, Mayor Jonathan Cote in New Westminster, were finally able to stay out after dark, thanks to them repealing this bylaw. And you can see that at the bottom of the screen grab there, somebody's obviously come back to him with another bylaw, perhaps, that they think should be repealed, and he's responded. He hasn't engaged in an in-depth policy discussion with them. Twitter isn't a great forum for doing that unless you're sharing a link, because it's 140 characters. But he's obviously listening, and he's engaging back with his constituents. Another way you can engage in social media is this. If you follow Vancouver news at all, Justin Trudeau was running on the seawall, and lo and behold, there was prom goers or grad people were taking photos there. And his photographer took a photo of this, put it on his social media feed, the photographer's social media feed, his Instagram page, and the media picked up on it, and it became earned media. The interesting thing about this is that it was actually a photo op. It wasn't real. It wasn't a real photobomb. So it's sort of gamifying media is what Justin Trudeau does. From the local news sphere, Leila Ewell is a former BC reporter turned political blogger. And what is most interesting about her, I think, is that she's very active on Twitter. She's put up a comment about something in the BC political sphere. And what I want to point out here is not what she said and what people responded, but the fact at the bottom of the screen grab is that you can see that she has responded back. So perhaps being unburdening herself of the shackles of being an impartial journalist has allowed her to answer questions and engage in conversation online in a way that journalists, I think, often don't. Richard Zussman, a CBC reporter who did an excellent job of covering our recent BC election, put up this post. This was a big moment from the BC election where Premier Christy Clark was in a grocery store doing a campaign stop, and just a citizen came up to her and said, "I won't vote for you because," at which point Christy Clark cut her off. Huge moment. You can see that Richard Zussman has 72 replies to this post, and I couldn't find that he came back and responded at all to the people who are wanting to engage with him. Now, we know that that Twitter has become a very partisan locale where people are very entrenched on either side, but in a sense, what he's done is, or what reporters are doing and what politicians are doing are similar to what Christy Clark did in this moment. And she was very, very criticized for it, which is not engaging with people who disagree with you or may have strong political opinions. Just because someone doesn't support you or they are a partisan, I'm not sure why that means that you can't engage in a conversation with them on Twitter. So during this conference, there's been a lot of talk of trolls, and trolls are real. But it's not just politics and it's not just news that we see trolls online. Try using the hashtag feminism and see what that comes up with for you. You are guaranteed to get trolls. And as somebody, again, as I've said, who is a politician online for actual elected politicians, I do understand that trolls are real. But if we look at it in that Twitter is a public sphere, if it was a real life public sphere, if a politician held a public town hall meeting, and Often at a public town hall meeting, if you've ever been to one, there is somebody who's very loud, they dominate the microphone. Trolls are not really that different in that they want to disrupt, they often insult, they're very distracting to the conversation. But if the politician simply turned up the mic and kept speaking over to them, people would not take that very kindly. Generally, what you would do is you would actually engage others in a conversation around that person. And it's very, very possible to do that. And if politicians and reporters use trolls as an excuse to not engage in social media, then we're not living up to that public sphere opportunity that does exist there, where the everyday citizen can speak, they have the opportunity to speak to power. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadine, and that was brilliant because I didn't even have to hold up any of my signs. So in this next presentation, we are going to look at other ways of looking at digital audiences through text analysis. So I'd like to bring up Priya Kumar and Philip Mai with predicting what will get likes on Facebook, page of BlogTO, a local daily news weblog.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Philip Mai. I'm the Director of Business and Communication here at the Ryerson Social Media Lab. I'm here with my colleague, Priya Kumar. We're here this morning presenting to you a little study that we just recently completed on predicting what get likes on Facebook pages of BlogTO, a local media site here. Okay. Give me 1 second to get myself situated. Okay. So a little bit about BlogTO, for those of you who are not from Toronto. It's a source for local news and culture, restaurant reviews, events, listings, and the best of the city. The Facebook page itself was launched in 2004. Since then, they've accumulated about 300,000 followers. And a little bit about our lab. We here at the Social Media Lab, we study how social media is changing the way we communicate and connect. We also train a lot of undergraduate and students all the way up to postdoc. And we organize large international events such as the upcoming Social Media Society Conference. And we develop software for data analytics for other researchers. We started out developing some of these software for ourselves to use in our own studies, but then a lot of people came and asked us, what are you using to get that data and to parse that data? So we started basically releasing our tools to the public so that any researcher can use them. Back to our research question. For those of you interested, we posted the slides to our presentation online, and that's the link up at the top. We want to know what kind of blog post gets more like on Facebook. We want to know whether there are certain types of content, such as videos, photos, links, and so on, that are more engaging to the readers. And also whether there are any linguistic cues in the post themselves that might increase the chance that somebody will like that post. For the way we went about doing this, we divide this project into basically 3 stages. The first one, of course, is data collection. We use the tool that we developed in the lab to get the data. And then we use 2 other pieces of software. One is called Loop to do automated text analysis, and of course, SPSS. Just to dig a little bit deeper into Netlytic itself, it's a social media analytic platform designed for researchers to collect, analyze, and visualize publicly available data. And I want to emphasize that part, publicly available data. We're not looking at anybody's private data. We only look at stuff that are publicly available. And you can get data from Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, blogs. So this way, you don't have to learn anything about APIs or programming or anything. You simply go and point, and it gets it for you. And right now, this tool is being used by thousands of researchers and students around the world because we basically offer it up for free. With the tool itself, like I said, you can collect the data. And then once you have the data, you can then use it to discover popular topics within your data set. What are people talking about? When did they talk about them? When did the conversation die down? When did it pick up again? Who was the one that started it up again, for example? You can also use it to explore emerging themes of discussions from your data set. It's a rudimentary form of sentiment analysis. You can also then use it to build and visualize a communication network. Who talks to whom? Who replies to whom? How often? Who is central in the conversation? Who's at the periphery? Who's part of the larger cluster? Who's an outlier in the conversation. So getting back to our data set, it was from April 3rd to May 3rd, so roughly 30-something days, there were a total of 11,000 unique posters, and there were a total of 17,000 plus posts and replies. So what that tells you is that most of the posters only posted on average one post to BlogTO when they see new content from them. And also, if you look, once we graph that out, you can see the daily posting frequency. You see the peaks and the trough. The peaks are usually in the middle of the week, because on Wednesdays, when people start thinking about the weekend. So they want to check BlogTO to see what should they be doing this weekend. And Sunday usually is the low point, because basically they're recovering. But you can see that pattern very clearly from the data once you have it as to when people get onto BlogTO and when it's quiet. Here's a sample of the data that we were able to pull in Excel format. So you get things like the publication date of that particular post, the author, the content of the post itself, the type of post, and the number of counts. Most people, like I said, they stop at the number of counts because, again, it's a low-hanging fruit. You can just say, okay, that was popular because, look, it got X number of likes. But we want to go beyond that. What causes people to get to like something on Facebook? So we did some preliminary network analysis on it, but as you can see from this network, it's a big ball of yarn. Each of those dots on there is a person. The connections are when they talk about the post, or they make a comment about a BlogTO post, but it's not very informative. The network visualization for this particular data set is not very informative because, again, like I said, it's a big ball of yarn that your cat might play with. But what it does tell you is that basically BlogTO is using their Facebook page more or less as traditional broadcast medium, where this is basically what they call a star network, where BlogTO is the star in the center, and everybody else are the bit players who come and read their content and go away. There's not a lot of engagement. It's what I call a word from God network, where in this case, God is BlogTO, and they dish something out. People come and read it, but there's no engagement among the people who read BlogTO. So again, from the 17,000 posts and replies, we then reduce that down to just, and pull out just the BlogTO posts themselves. And that's the focus of our text analysis. And here's another example. This is a typical blog post that they put on Facebook. It's a picture with a short little comment. Toronto is looking like a unicorn frappuccino. For those of you who don't know, the unicorn frappuccino is a little fad that drink that Starbucks released earlier last month, and it was a limited time offer. So next, I'm going to turn this over to Priya. She's going to go over the text analysis.
Okay, so just continuing off from Philip's collection of the raw Facebook data, we wanted to unpack that data. So what we did is we used LUC, which stands for Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count Software, and it's an automatic text analysis software coming out of the University of Texas. And the reason we wanted to use LUC is because we were interested in the power of words. So there's been a lot of interest in how online behaviors are changing, what can local news sites do to drive engagement towards their Facebook presence. And through our methodology, we were hoping to uncover new strategies and tactics that local news sites like BlogTO can use to increase online engagement. So if you didn't know about LUC, we wanted to also justify our use of this software. It's in its 4th iteration. It's a very reliable software. It mirrors human and social behaviors, and it can actually extrapolate meanings from any sort of text, so blogs, speeches, newspapers. And it has an extensive dictionary which covers social, psychological, cognitive, behavioral dimensions. So there's linguistic dimensions, so all of the grammar, articles, verbs. There's psychological constructs, so cognition, personal concerns, so activities, leisure activities, workplace, environment, all those words are covered. informal languages, including swear words, and more so online speech nowadays, which is what we were interested in particularly, and punctuation, so periods, commas, exclamation points. So just to give you an example of the diversity of categories, there are 90 categories in this software. So the category of risk would be words that are perceived as threatening. So words like danger would be in this category. The power category signifies strength or control. So words like superiority or the word bully would be flagged in the power category. The leisure category is any word or activity that does not happen at work. So to chat, to cook, to go to a movie, those are the type of words that would be in that category. And just to go back to the example that Philip, sorry here. So just to go back to the example that Philip pointed out with collecting the data, we input this data from BlogTO into the Luke software. So you can see there that the comment is in the Excel-like sheet. This is the actual software. And then on the top right, you can't see them, but each row will have each of the categories there. So if we go to the example here, you'll see that basically the text goes into the software, and then for the word looking, let's say, it will be flagged as perception NC. And so if we go forward with that, we were interested in the counts, and the analysis that we undertook actually was with the score. So in the software, each word in that text is given a count, and then it's given a final percentage score. And so ultimately what we wanted to do was we wanted to put it into a regression, okay? So what we did with that is we also accounted for the type of post, as Philip mentioned. So we also were interested in whether it was videos, photos, links, or events that were rendering or higher or lower Facebook-like for BlogTO. So here are some other examples of categories. So comparisons would be any text with the word greater than, more than, better than, interrogatives, the how, what, when, why words, for example. So after putting that into our regression, we found that out of the 90 Luke categories, 10 came out as statistically significant. And when we say statistically significant, what we mean is that these results were not by chance. Interestingly, we found that video was 8 times more influential than the next category, which is social processes. The other point that we want to lay out here is that this model from our regression analysis explains 24% of the variance in Facebook likes. So that means that there's around 76% that we have not accounted for. At the same time, in much of the psychological literature, there's this acknowledgement that predicting human behavior is very difficult, particularly in online space. And usually you're getting rates of lower than 50%. So now we're just going to discuss very briefly some of our strongest predictors and anomalies that came out. Like I said before, video came out as a very strong predictor. And this is really interesting because in our data set, videos represented only 6% of all of the content of BlogTO, and yet it was 8 times more likely to predict a Facebook like. And what we found was that actually a lot of the videos were focusing on food. Maybe people are clicking with their appetites, or it's something that we're all interested in. Maybe we're speaking to a particular audience. Similarly, the category of social processes also predicted an increase in Facebook likes. So social processes basically are words that allude to human interaction. And so people, family, friends, and in this example you have hey girl, and here are some other additional posts from our data set from BlogTO. So show mom some love, attention parents. So that makes sense that people would be going on BlogTO to find an activity to do on the weekend with their family and friends. Okay. And so another category that predicted a positive like was informal language. So that is the exclamation points came out there, and also at the same time, I think it really alludes to the idea of a particular audience, that you're speaking in slang online. Is there a demographic that BlogTO is appealing to? But at the same time, what we found was that within that informal language, NetSpeak actually showed a negative relationship. So the more NetSpeak predicted a decrease in Facebook likes. And this is an anomaly which we want to unpack. So when we talk about NetSpeak, we're talking about hashtags and @ symbols. Maybe there's a nuance that we're missing out on, that you want to use informal language, but you don't necessarily want to go overboard where there's a lack of context in the post. So just moving forward with the implications of what does this mean and what do these tools tell us? Well, the implications is that conversations have to be more engaging. There is this emphasis on community that is missing out, and speaking to Philip's point as well about the network being a ball of yarn, that engagement is lacking, that there are a lack of reciprocal relationships. We're just sharing information. So local news sites could benefit from engaging more with Facebook followers. Along the engagement thread, you're looking at more visuals, so using videos. Maybe photos are becoming static and out of date at this point. Along those lines, be strategic with informal language, and also direct your attention to specific activities so that people aren't necessarily wasting their time surfing your website. Now, we'd like to conclude with just some ideas of what we can examine in the future. We have 3 lines here. So when we look at future research, it would be fruitful to examine, first of all, the content of photos, videos, and blogs, not just the textual posts, which was the focus of this study today, particularly with videos. Second, we would want to look at analyzing the audience. Who's exactly engaging in these posts, and why are they doing so? And finally, we want to account for timelines. Are there particular niche communities or niche activities that engage with BlogTO, or local news sites that maybe cater to particular events that are happening in the city? So in conclusion, we hope that you've learned about BlogTO, and also that you've learned that we do have methodological tools that allow us to capture data and also make sense of it in the analyses. And that, of course, is our slide share on the top, and we'd be happy to take your questions after. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As you'll see in this next presentation, I too used many of the tools that were being talked about in the last presentation. So I do encourage and urge all of you to come up and talk to Philip and Priya later on if you're interested in learning more. So in my presentation, I'm going to present 3 case studies of using digital tools to research local news in a few different ways. Some of these are really, I think, a continuation of what we would do with maybe offline tools, but taking them into a digital space, which allows us to maybe reach farther or speak to people, understand them in a different way. And I think they all definitely allow us to get into this digital space where local news is finding a niche and finding a place where people have to go to reach audiences. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about the new media realities that has led us to this. I'm going to talk about how we might understand online audiences, and then I'm going to just whip right into the 3 case studies. We're going to look at text and content mining using the hashtags election42 and Canadian Poly. I'm going to talk a little bit about network analysis, although I probably won't spend a lot of time on it because our previous presentations conveyed it very well. And we're going to look at a network around the sharing of the local news map, which is one of the projects I'm working on with April Lindgren here at Ryerson. And then finally, I'm going to talk about borrowing from user experience design in order to detect audience preferences and better understand our audience so that we can deliver local news to them. And the case study I'm going to be looking at is youth in Calgary, Alberta. So of course, as we know, and we've been talking about this yesterday and through today, news in smaller Canadian communities or communities that are not near a major media center is at risk. You know, they're shutting down, they're consolidating. We've seen so much compelling evidence of this in the different news maps that we've seen. But we also know that, unfortunately, civic engagement declines immediately following the closure of local newspapers, so there is something to be concerned with here. How do we get information out to people who need them when local newspapers are not available? We know that communities with lower incomes tend to be underserved by local news media outlets. And we know now that journalists are being called to do more with less, right? They're engaging with the audiences across multiple platforms, and we really want to find out, as in the previous presentation, how we can best do that. And now we know, too, that a quarter of newspaper advertising revenue comes from digital. Google is eating the world, and part of that is finding new ways to monetize and make money so that we can produce local news content. So, of course, more and more people are active social media users. There's about half of the total world population is online. They're using mobile, and they're active on mobile social media, and that creates a whole new way of needing to understand our audiences and their needs. We know that digital audiences are reading but not subscribing. They like to taste content from all over many different outlets. They're not necessarily that keen on paying for it, though. And we know that they're also consuming news via social media shares, particularly younger people, or the millennial quote-unquote generation. Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube news users are more likely to get their news online. And people are reporting that they're getting news from Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, etc. So that's changing the way we need to find out about them and their habits. We also know that online audiences are a little bit different than our offline audiences traditionally were. So they are exposed to so much information online that they sort of have to pick and choose what they're going to pay attention to. And this can create, some people would say, a filter bubble where, as we saw in the Donald Trump election, people sort of choose the information that supports their already existing point of view and discard the rest. Now, Nadine talked earlier about online engagement, and I think it's worth understanding online engagement and how you're going to measure it, because if you can't measure something, then, or if you can't define something, then you cannot measure it. So Nadine, for example, talked about their hierarchies of engagement, and you move from interest to interaction, you move from consumption to creation, from maybe emotional involvement to action. And she talked about taking a holistic view that includes everything from dialogue all the way down to that broadcasting hairball that Philip showed us earlier. But to understand this, we can go about it in many different ways. So, as you saw in the previous presentation, text and content mining is a common way that we do things, because that tends to be, if we go back to our model of engagement, a common way that people are engaging, right? It's through dialogue, it's through calls to action and that sort of thing. Network analysis was something else that we saw earlier. And I'd like to add to the mix sort of online surveys and user experience methods as new ways, borrowing from the digital sphere, that we can understand our audiences. Of course, there are a lot more, and if we had unlimited time, I would want to explore all of them, but we've got 15 minutes today. So, of course, text and content mining, as we can see, scrapes text from the web, from social media, from blogs, from online pages of the local newspapers that we are interested in. Often people use a combination of text analysis software and old-fashioned content analysis, and we saw a great example of software with the Luke demonstration. But we also have teams of coders that will go in and look at each individual post and code them the old-fashioned way too. So it sort of depends on whether you're doing a content analysis or whether you want to get more into the discourses that are taking place. And text and content mining, of course, shows who's talking and what they are saying. So in the graphic up there, it's some text that we scraped during the 2015 Canadian federal election. And you can see that the word cloud, of course, shows what the most popular words are by frequency. And the bar chart, which is very small, shows the different people that were communicating during the election on Twitter. Interestingly enough, Anonymous was one of the top tweeters during the Canadian federal election, followed by different mainstream media outlets like CP24 and CBC, and of course we also have our major party leaders up there, Harper, Trudeau, etc. Now, you saw some tools to do this. There are other tools as well. Tweet Archivist is a tool that you can use just if you're interested in scraping Twitter. It, like Netlytic, is quite cheap to use, and it provides some in-tool analysis. Netlytic, as was described earlier, is a go-to, I think, for a lot of people in the academic and social media communities. AntConc is a freeware or open source concordancer, which allows you to look at word frequencies and compare two different texts to one another. And the text analysis portal for research is a cloud-based text analysis tool that allows you to visualize your data in very interesting ways. Now, in Election 42 in Canadian Poly that I showed you before, we used Tweet Archivist to scrape all the tweets related to hashtag Election 42 and hashtag Canadian Poly during the 2015 federal election. And then we took that data and we used a combination of Netlytic, Tapor tools, and AntConc to understand what people were saying by looking at raw word frequencies and word frequencies when compared to a reference corpus. We also had a group of coders come in and look at Facebook posts that were related to the election based on a keyword search and code the number of Facebook posts and where they came from and what content was shared. And now I want to talk to you about the video, photos, etc. So again, what we found out is on Twitter, the top 10 influencers were generally, again, mainstream media outlets throughout the election, the party leaders and reporters that worked for national news outlets. And this was true even when we broke the data down into local communities. So when we were looking at Nanaimo, BC, or Brampton, or Kawartha Lakes, was still the national figures and the national news sources that remained big influencers. And we can see on Facebook, we had very few contributors from the community that posted to Facebook. A lot of local newsrooms and media outlets, and very few, so I guess what one might qualify as citizen journalists. And we talked earlier about network analysis, so I won't get into the big hairball. But this is very similar in the fact that you scrape data from social media, but you're looking at it in a different way. As Philip mentioned, network analysis is showing the connections between users, showing how messages are coming in and going out. And it can show how local news messages travel over time. So of course, netlytic.org is at the top of the list, and you can use it in combination with other graph analysis tools like Gephi or GraphViz. NodeXL tends to be useful for those people who have more technical coders on their team, or if you are more technical yourself. But as I said earlier, I would highly recommend having a conversation with our guests about Netlytic if you're interested. So we use Netlytic to visualize the spread of the local news map. So as April Lindgren was sharing the local news map with others, we wanted to see how many people were contributing via Twitter to the local news map, because we're really trying to understand how people can be encouraged to crowdsource this sort of thing. We noticed that the local news map mentions on Twitter would spike whenever there was a mainstream media story about the local news map, and that's when you can see the timeline there of mentions. And in our network hairball, we've got our own April Lindgren at the center. And it was maybe not quite a God effect, because there are more connections going in and coming out. But she is a crucial node in the network, meaning that because she's the originator of the local news map and the person who is most likely to be interviewed on the mainstream news stories about the map, her handle was nearly always mentioned when people talked about the map on Twitter. And then finally, we've borrowed some tools from user experience design to talk about and understand user and audience preferences when it comes to social media use. Now, you can do free pile sort in person with analog tools. You can do them with paper and a pencil, or these can also be completely digital, and you can send them to people online and have people do an online activity. And this reveals relationships that may not be apparent immediately through survey or interview data, because when you ask people in a survey why they use social media, there's a respondent bias. They tend to tell you what they think you want to hear. But when you ask them to sort social media into categories, there are unconscious assumptions that they make about the use of social media in their lives that are revealed because they've sorted it and then thought about why they sorted the way they did. So our favorite tool right now for doing this is Optimal Workshop. It's Optimal Sort has produced a card sorting tool for UX research, and now we're using it academically. It allows you to send this out to people online so you can reach people anywhere and find out why they're using what they're doing. They also have a reframer tool that allows you to understand people's responses and use discourse analysis to code them. But you can also use something as simple as Trello, which a lot of people use for project management, or Post-it notes and paper if you're doing this sort of thing in person. So we did this for youth in Calgary, Alberta, and we asked them to take their top social media platforms and sort them into categories. We did not give them any cues as to what categories to sort them in. We just said, we want you to sort based on what you think, how they should be grouped together. So it was a completely open card sort. And what we found out was that people do tend to cluster different social media platforms together in a predictable sort of way. So for example, they'll cluster together based on affordances, which means they'll cluster together all the video in one cluster, or they'll cluster together the photo in one cluster. They'll cluster together news sharing websites like Dig and Reddit together. We learned, though, that Reddit and Dig are sources of information for young people, and they are often classified or thought of as news outlets amongst youth in Calgary, Alberta. And young people use social media differently depending on which groups of people they are interacting with. So in addition to sorting by affordances, they also tend to sort based on sort of family. So I will use this tool with my parents, and this tool with my friends, and this tool at work. And what we learned is that to reach young people, or this particular audience at least, it's not enough to just spread yourself very thin and try to use all the tools, but rather know what they share where, and then post strategically in order to reach them. So for example, if I was going to try and find them with news, I would probably start with Reddit and Dig, and then I would probably also follow up with some of the other platforms. Whereas if I was looking at a different community, journalists for example, I might choose to post news on Twitter. I have 1 minute left, so I'm just going to tell you about a few next steps for each of these. We're going to narrow down our textual analysis to individual communities. For example, we've started in Nanaimo, BC, conducting a more detailed textual analysis of tweets to find out that we actually had a similar fake news issue during our recent election as the one we saw in the States, albeit at a much lower scale. We're going to extend the free pile sort study to include journalists. We're starting on Vancouver Island, and I would love to talk to anybody who is interested in doing this with journalists in their network, because I think we can do much more to find out how journalists think about social media and whether that aligns with what their audiences think. And then finally, we're going to use network mapping to visualize connections between news stories for #election42. So that's my very broad and quick overview of 3 different digital case studies. And I've got 8 seconds left, but I'm going to use that time to introduce David. So David Secco from Carleton University is going to talk about local journalists as social mobilizers. And so we have another case study. It's a qualitative assessment of local journalism in the 2014 Ebola epidemic. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for the introduction. I'll get my thingy up, and then where do I exist? So now for something different, as it often is with me, for those that know me. And I'm Concordia, not Carleton. It's a typo in the thing, and it's all good. It's all good. I don't want to belittle anyone from Carleton, but Concordia is way better. I'll just leave it there. And I move around for whoever's doing the video, so track, please. What I want to talk about today, basically, is a little bit about my own research that kind of is outside the box for this, and I'll try to connect it to both the local news. April's been very nice to me to allow me to present when I'm kind of outside this area, and also to the tools in the particular sense. I'm an associate professor and the current chair of journalism at Concordia, and do I have a forward thing here? There we go. And basically, with the World Federation of Science Journalists and IDRC, we've been looking at, in my own mind, the lived experiences of local journalists going through a health crisis of a magnitude that they had never seen before. And in this case, it's the 2014 Ebola outbreak. And in many ways, the way I'm going to try to connect it, and I'm going to try to use my time quickly, I'm going to start going faster in a second, is one with methodology and about how I love content analysis, I love the social media analysis and things like that. But for me as a researcher, I'll tell you why, talking to journalists, if you want to understand how these things work, is the way you would need to add that. And that's part of what we've been interested in our team. And secondly, this idea of what you might be able to gain from the role adjustments that might happen during an outbreak or a health crisis of this magnitude, to see a little bit about how local journalists react to some of these ideas is kind of what I want to talk to. And I often start with this, and sorry for those who are at CCA that are going to see this again. I don't think anybody in the room was, so we're ace in that kind of a way. But this is what got me kick-started in many ways in thinking about this project and thinking about the experiences. It's quotes like this from a Western journalist when we started to talk to people and think about the Ebola outbreak. And this journalist says, I saw the US coverage, Ebola in 2014, for instance, because I was writing for a US magazine, and the US coverage was very hysteric. I think it was very sad to see how people were writing mostly about 2 or 3 cases in the US, while the real story was going on in Africa. That was very annoying. I saw it as a failure in journalism that people weren't able to perceive, even though it was so far away, the real story that was happening there, in that kind of sense. And for me, it coalesced and kind of thinks against about how, if we were going to talk to the local journalists, the journalists that were actually there, what they might say about this and how this might be done. And here's a quote from one of the African journalists that was interviewed during this project, saying, from the onset, we had not had much training in health reporting, so we did not know the basics. We did not know how to conduct ourselves. Maybe we've been involved in reporting politics, reporting development issues, reporting other issues, but a health crisis, a humanitarian crisis of this sort, was quite strange. So it was like difficult. We had to learn. Why did we? We had to, basically. And we had to learn on the job as we reported this crisis. But it was a difficult task. And for me, thinking about local journalists and their responses to things, I was very interested in what this difficult task and how people would start to talk about it. Partially because I wanted to be at the center of this triangle. I was very interested in these ideas of biocommunicability and this idea of how health news, how information gets shared, the models that might be used to do that. And if I want to understand things like local journalism, if I want to understand areas of how journalists are responding, if I, for myself, want to understand how you respond to a health issue if you want to, there's lots out there, a lot of thinkers who you may or may not agree with, that have thought and theorized about if you wanted this form to look this way, that it might be this kind of a model. So we were particularly interested in that. On the other corner, my own research team basically has focused in its methodology for the past 10 years as part of the Concordia Science Journalism Project on detailed journalist narratives. That's the methodology we often bring in these things. And what we're really interested in is a whole bunch of things. We're interested in what actually counts for these journalists, what counts as local journalism, what counts as an issue, what counts as why I do what I do, how that's demarcated. And we often find that many of the other methodologies we've used don't allow us to learn as much about that as actually doing a detailed interview with a person will allow us. We're very interested in the logic behind a decision. So why would you choose to do this over that? We're interested in the documented or undocumented relationships that build out of beginning to learn this. And in particular, while values are important, I'm really interested in the unarticulated challenges. Because for me, and I've said this many times in my work, and those that know me kind of know this is one of my beefs, that if I go back 100 years and I start to think about some of the issues we're talking about, I read almost the exact same thing in different words, right? So why do these things keep coming up? Why are we always talking about the same ideas, even though the challenges in the context might change? And in health and science journals, that's particularly true. So I'm often interested in what haven't we heard yet? Or what don't we know yet that might impact how we think about these things? And for me, that's very important. And at the bottom is all this research that's around how you do this. And for us, we're at the middle of that in particular ways. And what we wanted to do is actually explore the lived experiences of journalists who actually covered the Ebola outbreak, the local journalists that went through. So I'm already through 5 minutes and already here. But what I want to kind of talk about in some ways, and I'm going to try to go a little bit fast so there's time and I don't go over my 15 minutes too much, is to think about kind of what happened in the local context here and how we kind of talk about how there might have been these there were these top-down heavy information streams that happened at the beginning of this outbreak, and how local information streams either had to be recreated or built or had to come to the forefront as we kind of went through this. And I'm going to talk about it through what we learned from journalists, and in this particular case it's about 36 in total, but I'm talking about only 33 of the interviews today. You can ask me questions later about why, about how we kind of see this and the effect of that in there. We're good? I know I'm going fast. Everyone's here? See where we're going? All right, great. So, the recap, just so everyone knows where we are. I want to put you guys all in the situation. 2014 Ebola virus outbreak was believed to be started in Cochrane around December 2013, but it wasn't until 2014 in March, a lot later, that WHO started to kick in and talk about this. So there was a huge kind of gap, and the WHO was criticized at the time and still has been about the response time of getting to this. We're talking about a virulent viral disease that kills 50 to 90% of people that are infected. So this is pretty crazy. If you get it, you're pretty much, likely to die in many ways. Early symptoms are vague, and this is one of the problems when we're thinking about this, in the sense of it looks like malaria, it looks like influenza, it looks like a bunch of other diseases that you might otherwise have in the areas that are out there. So how do you know if you have Ebola or not if it just looks like anything else that you might have been exposed to? Spread through bodily fluids. In this case, we're talking about an outbreak that killed 5 times more people than all the other outbreaks put together. So this was the big one, right? And it had huge kind of consequences on all sorts of different levels as we come through. And the other thing that was interesting for me from the local, non-local kind of thinking about it was that very quickly, more quickly than ever that had happened before in many of these outbreaks, we talk about swine flu and many other things that happened, is that there was almost critique, not instantaneously if you look at the dates, but much faster than I've ever seen before. You see people like Celeste coming out right away talking about how we're talking about healthcare workers leading to more deaths, the way we're kind of talking about it. You see Julia, who's from Toronto, but is a great science reporter in the States now, coming out about a year after she'd been kind of this, talking right away about all the things that reporters did wrong, all the things that could have been done different really quickly. So for me, it's an interesting case study for that reason too, that the responses were so quick in that kind of a sense. What the project did, just so we have a sense to put it up there, we're really interested not in the past kind of research that had been done. A lot of this was about local journalism, how local communities respond, and the importance of local journalism, but also journalism that's non-local in some sense, and often focused on the failures of representation, the failures of media to cover an issue like this, so whether local or not, the successes, perceptions, but very, very little had done anything. And I've actually seen it through this conference as well, and that's one of the things that is probably there, but it never comes to the surface in the way I might like, had talked about the actual lived experience of journalists that may or may not be experiencing this. And I think it's one of the reasons I wanted to be here, and I love this, and I love meeting people, is I think there's also opportunities in many of the talks we've heard to think about how detailed journalistic narratives, lived experiences might bring out some of the issues we've been talking about. So we really wanted to be here, and we wanted to fix that. We did in-depth semi-structured interviews. So these are interviews that really would take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours with these journalists, or very open-ended. We did have a beginning where we're asking them, well, we want to talk about Ebola and anything you want to talk about it. And then they would just launch in and start going in that kind of sense. We analyzed them with a modified version of grounded theory that we use. And in this case, I'm talking about 33 journalists recruited through workshops as part of the World Federation of Science Journalists. And this is kind of a mixture of convenience and theoretical sampling that, if for those interested in those kind of things, we could talk about later. If I give an overview of results, these are the things that come out of those 33 interviews. And if you go 33 times 3 hours, that's the amount of tape that we have to kind of work through and think about it. Really, 4 things are talked about in those interviews. 1 was the practice of journalism, how it went. 2 was this combination between the health issue and journalism. 3 was sourcing, which was a huge one. And for those that are interested in this field, this one is going to be an interesting paper when it comes out finally. And the last one were many of the challenges that came up. And really what I want to talk about today, because I don't have a ton of time to go through it all, is some of the responses to the challenges within this view of this idea of local journalists and how they respond in a situation like that. And in particular for me, it's we'll see what the people say or if they ask questions. And I know it's a little outside the box for the first 3, so bear with me. One of the things I want to say that I think is important to understanding what we see here, and I know it's going fast, but these slides will be available and people can bug me, and this will come out in a few publications over the summer, is this idea that in thinking about what I'm going to say about social mobilization, about how journalists responded to this and what they saw and all these kind of ideas, that when Ebola hit, it was all-consuming, you had to cover it aggressively, we had no experience, we were often disappointed in what we did, and this is the journalists talking about. There was a fear. The sources we used were often talking about top-down heavy sources. We're not looking for local-type sources or sources that would support that. Only 3 of the 33 are really thinking about victims. Coverage was not easy in that kind of sense. Those things all add together to the uniqueness of Ebola, and I won't go through this because I only have about 5 minutes left to kind of go through the final slides. But I think in thinking about how a local journalist would respond to a crisis of this magnitude, you have to think also about the uniqueness of what they were dealing with, right? Talked about Ebola as very different than anything else they had seen, very different than anything they had come across before. That unfamiliarity and the unwillingness of government to share information with them, and at the same time, the commitment of every society. All right, so I'm going to breathe for a second. Let people kind of see that and try to connect this all together. I won't go through this much more other than to say we followed this up with a whole bunch of survey work and other things to kind of talk about and think about how much these issues come together. And this is just a preview of things to come in the future. But what I want to kind of talk about in the last 3 or 4 minutes I have is connect this idea to the idea of what's been talked about at this conference so far, to this idea of what might have happened in this to lead to so many deaths. In many ways, people would say, and they said it in a lot of these interviews, that all the early information was really top-down heavy, non-local messaging. So this was things where either health authorities or governments were providing information the same to everyone, and journalists who were very basically unsure about this, didn't know what was going on, just took these messages and started to amplify them. None of them at the time, at the beginning of the interviews, would talk about how their audiences, as we might have heard, or the local kind of area of their stunts, could have helped in going this forward. They only realized this a little bit later as they came forward, that all the things that we were doing originally, and I'll put a quote up in a second to give you an example, was leading potentially us down the wrong path. Not allowing our communities, not allowing those audiences that we're trying to serve as local journalists, and I'm talking from the perspective of these journalists, to kind of help. So at one point, in all the interviews almost, and I'd say the maximum about 80%, everyone talked about it a little, but there's this flip. There's this flip in how the journalists would respond to questions about what they had to do and what came forward, where they stopped talking about dealing with the non-local messaging, dealing with the priorities, dealing with, let's say, the WHO, and just taking those messages and trying to amplify them out, and instead switching their thinking and switching their role to really begin to think about themselves as a humanitarian. That this was no longer that I could deal with this as a regular journalist or even a local journalist who I had gone before, but I often have to just change myself to become a humanitarian. And they started to say things like this. We would go to covering the deepest hamlet, all the moods. There was the distribution of hygiene kits and everything else that went with it. We went with the Red Cross to spray places, even the corpses, right? So this is at the beginning, they're often talking about their interviews as they're just taking information, they're trying to amplify on the radio station or put it into print, get it done. They realize that they're losing the war, the battle, and that they have to shift. And at that point, they really start to talk about the early messaging being developed with little research into the barriers of what their local audiences or their residences really need. And they need to flip their mind into thinking about how this was going to work from a local journalism perspective. And to do that, their response to these journalists was to abandon any roles that they had before or any other views they had about how their journalism should be done and to become a humanitarian. We had to fill a duty to our communities at any cost. So whether or not they were going to breach, like not ethics, but they're going to think about their role as a journalist differently, it had to be done in certain ways. And you see this developing through 4 emergent themes that I won't go through, but they talk about the awareness of that, the duty coming forward, this idea that they had to start to support and sensitize their local communities, and finally that they were becoming in some ways protectors as they kind of gone through. And I know you're not going to have time to read all through this, so I'll kind of leave it. And instead, because I have 1 minute and a half left, and I know I'm speaking quickly, I'll go to the main point, which was this. This idea that what really happened in these interviews and what comes out for me, and there's a lot of analysis that there's people talking about, was the flip from how things started as non-local messaging, how people just took messages like this at the top. Here's the quote that exemplifies it for me. The health authority themselves did not really digest the information. The first information brought great fear. So this was at the start, for those that remember, that what all the health authorities were releasing, what WHO was releasing, was basically just Ebola can kill. Ebola can kill. Those signs were pasted everywhere. The front of the newspapers, that's all it says. That's all you can see, the fold. That's all the radio stations were broadcasting. Ebola can kill. You touch someone and you will die. These very non-local, just like we have a health crisis and we have to do it. There's a flip at one point where the journalists begin to say that that's not going to work. It's not working. We need to change into a more local kind of set of how we think about this and how we can get done. How do we actually think about the cultures that are going on? How do we think about our particular needs in our community, all the communities that are done? Not only is there the sense of that there's more than 30 different dialects that the non-local messaging doesn't even care about. This is all coming out in English, let's say, and everything else is not. In that kind of a way, we have a journalists begin to then start to say things like, we fulfill our duty to communities at any cost. It was a little bit like your warriors. Once you're fighting, you cannot get back. We had to save lives. So you see that transition between those things. And that says finish or else. That's trouble, holy moly. I like the challenge of or else. Let's see what happens if I don't finish right away. All I want to say, and this is the last slide of the other way, is that for me, a lot of what our research has done around local and non-local, but also just thinking about how journalists think about things, is to think about the 4 models that go into how journalists often think about their responses to things like that. And for us, many journalists started with the non-local information, with a crisis that they couldn't think about, that they weren't sure how to process, they had no experience in. It was a magnitude of nothing they'd ever seen. and really kind of emulated either their journalistic practice of what they've done before, forgot about their local kind of sense of what they should go on, and really became a linear refractionist, right? This idea that WHO is telling us to do this, we're just going to spit out Ebola can kill, Ebola can kill. And at one point, they had to redefine the community information needs of their community. And they had to redefine what local meant to them, whether it just meant bringing it out again, because there's a fear factor here that is a paper that I gave at CCC about how people were scared, and started to flip to become a humanitarian. And in that sense, for me, it adds this kind of idea in the sense of when does the local become important, and when do these models overlap and not overlap, and how do you play with that? I'll just say thank you, and you can write me anytime with more questions. I know that was fast, acknowledgement, and thank you to IDRC for funding the research. Only a minute over. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Thank you, everyone. Take this down so it's not flying up there.
Thank you so much, and I'd like to invite all of our panelists up to the table to sit and take questions. And we have about 15 minutes for questions if people are interested.
Can I just speak from here?
Is that fine?
Yeah.
Ah, yes.
So I wanted to say in particular, although you were all excellent, to Philip, and I've already forgotten your last name because I'm incompetent, but Philip and his lovely
Priya.
colleague.
Priya.
Priya, yes, Priya. I'm wondering, first of all, how far along you are in terms of identifying those who are actually participating. In other words, the actual interacting audiences, because of course in broadcast journalism, the key is there's detailed knowledge of the audience. You have detailed knowledge of the messaging and the interaction. I'm wondering how far along it will be until you're able to be as precise with audiences. Secondly, with David.
Me? Yes, David. You got it.
Okay.
You're doing great. I love it.
I'm wondering if in your interviews you also dealt with the issue, you had touched briefly on the concept of how decisions were made to cover what. I'm wondering if that engages at all the concept of ownership of the actual media outlets.
For us, we're still at the beginning stage because, again, we have the data set. We know who posted it because on Facebook, you get the real profile. It's not somebody that you made up. So next stage for us, if we were to continue this, is to basically go back and look at each one of those account and try to categorize them in some way. Are they male, are they female? Try to figure out maybe their income level based upon other cues that are available on their profile. To look at regionally, where are they from within Canada? Are they mostly from the 416, 905, or are they from beyond? So there are many different ways for us to examine it, but that's a little bit, that takes a little bit more tedious work because you literally will have to go through and look at each profile and say, okay, what do they have in common? What do they share? Where does the Venn diagram meet up? So,
Could
yeah.
I ask one follow-up to that? Are you getting any interest or push from advertisers to identify the audiences?
Yes, because I mean, all the social media platforms have that information because the information that we're able to get from these platforms is what they've chosen to give us. They keep the most valuable stuff for themselves and to be used internally because they know, for example, they will have, let's say, 5 years worth of your tweet. They will know what your political leaning is going to be because they've had, 5 years worth of your content. They know who you're connected to. Like, for example, on Facebook, I might be friend with a lot of people, but they know of my friends who are my real friends, right? So they can triangulate and figure out a lot about you more than you know about yourself sometimes, in the sense that you don't stop and think about these things because you just live your life, right? But they, on the other hand, can look at your digital footprint and make things that might be invisible visible, but only to themselves and to whoever's paying them to see this information. So like I said, the one thing about social media is that we've always been able to get data about ourselves, but the level of granularity that we've been able to get because of these platforms has been made it's infinitely, exponentially more granular now. They can slice and dice us. In the past, for example, we always been able to separate people. Oh, well, you live in that zip code, or you graduate from that high school. We know that most of the people from that zip code usually drive this type of car. that usually work in this type of industry. So we know the salary range. So as a result, advertiser can say, hi, don't send any flyers to that zip code because nobody there is going to buy my stuff. But now online, we can do that for the entire population of the whole country if they're on these platforms. So yes, they are.
And to the other question, yes, we know a little bit about the ownership and the level that's gone on. Those questions were collected at the end of the interviews. I would say the interesting thing about this and also the fear one is that I'd have to go back to do the full guarantee, but most of the journalists, irresponsive of private community or public ownership, talk about this kind of a transition during the time. And I think for me, it kind of relates to the magnitude of it. So you can't take that too far in the sense of all of them talk about pretty much being at war with Ebola and that everything has to be done and that we have to do everything we want to. But there is a whole discussion to be pulled out that is on the agenda to be done about how editors influenced journalists as they came back to the newsroom to talk about this and to talk about these changes and the responses of often the newsrooms to journalists kind of pretty much becoming humanitarians and fully involved and even at times coming back without a story because we were burying bodies. That's what we did today. We didn't get any news. And that's what we see our role as for now, kind of thing. So it's there. But I know that doesn't answer your question other than to say that we're aware that those things play into the equation of how journalists may have responded to this. But it seemed that for most of them, there was a need to kind of, abandon might not be the word, but modify how they saw their positioning in the community in that kind of a sense. And it really kind of begins to shift towards, not necessarily advocacy, as some people would talk about it, but towards a community-based kind of humanitarian need for their audiences being more important than what might be coming from the top down.
Yes, thank you.
Can I just, I have a question for Nadine, but I just want to follow up on something you said. So how did you come up with the term humanitarian? Like, why that term as opposed to, I mean, journalists respond to the community all the time. I find that it sounds like they're an NGO. Like, why did you pick that term?
I didn't. They did.
Sort of they did.
This is their words.
The journalists call themselves humanitarian.
Yes.
And what are the characteristics of that from what you gleaned from talking to them?
A characteristic is basically, in many senses, adding function. Like this is, I'd have to go in, and I shouldn't say they did, but I'd say that the code humanitarian comes from a section of the interviews that called themselves that. And in the context of what I'm thinking about, humanitarian aid was going on, everyone's coming down. It was like a big part of this. So it's not for me surprising that they might use the term that had been used like a lot around them during that crisis in that kind of a sense. But basically what they're starting to talk about and what they're trying to emulate is a more protective role that news was no longer the only or first part of the mission of what they were trying to do as journalists, but they also had to be community members and helpers and take hygiene kits and show people how to wash their hands. So instead of telling a story about washing your hands, going into the community, gathering people together and having the journalists that would have been reporting on that story saying, you wash your hands like this, you go like that, here's your kit. You put, because they didn't have any protection, we put plastic bags on your feet. Here's what to look for. We know that you have to bury your dead in this particular way, but can you wait for X to come, like we'll come with, because they trusted them, many of these journalists, we'll come with the Red Cross to help talk about it with the elders and to be that barrier. So we start to see them kind of almost taking on the lead role of what the Red Cross or MSF would have done in that kind of a sense and helping in that kind of thing. And that kind of switches as the crisis gets worse and worse. Now, the interesting thing is we don't have posts that I would love to know whether or not this just disappears afterwards. My guess is for many, this was just a unique thing and it's gone. So I know I'm talking too much, but yeah.
I mean, as a journalist, it's news you can use. It's just they're actually doing it, right? Like
They felt they kind of had to.
it
Yeah.
wasn't clear from your presentation
Yeah.
that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like that they were actually physically modeling.
They were physically modeling and being involved in that kind of thing. And I think there's like a level of difference between what people did and what they're comfortable with. But across the set, like it is a response to this that then also gets interesting responses in terms of how they dealt with their communities and how they started to deal with information in terms of setting up community networks of radio stations that would dispute out things in dialects and take things done and taking those kind of roles in that kind of a way. So there's a lot to talk about there that I will stop.
So Nadine, I have a couple questions around, you threw this thing out here at the end about trolls and responding to them. Can you be more specific about that?
Well, I think that there's different types of trolls. There's some people who are just blatantly offensive. They'd say things to Justin Trudeau, and he's not a person of color and he's not a woman. You're an idiot. And I don't think that there's any sense in responding back to somebody and trying to argue, no, I'm not an idiot. So I think there's different types of trolls. If people are very offensive and they're saying things that are racist or sexist or threatening, I don't think that there is a sense in engaging with them, and I'm not saying that. But I think that there's other types of trolls that use things that sound trolling, or if you're the person on the receiving end of it, might be a little rankling, as ways to engage. So one, for example, was that I found was about Justin Trudeau's hair, that somebody created like a spoof account about Justin Trudeau's hair, and it was very lighthearted. And it was sort of silly, but it was a little bit like just bordering on, probably somebody wouldn't want to engage with that. But yet, if you think about it, that somebody actually is obviously following something to do with politics to create an account about that. So I think depending on the type of trolling, there's different responses. So again, I would agree that if people are being offensive, like it says, don't feed the trolls. But I don't think that that's a reason to just ignore comments or just put up an article on a social media site and then just leave it. And not just to monitor it and delete or block offensive commenters, but that even having to read those, I know can be very traumatizing for people. But there is a value in coming back and having conversation with people who do want to have conversation. Because despite those, often on the same post, you'll have some trolls, you'll have some partisans, you'll have some people who are asking questions or providing insights. So I think that often the response is, well, the trolls are out there, so I don't want to engage at all. But I don't think that that's a good way to do it either, because in a way that almost, it allows them to create the environment that they want, which is just to disrupt the communication between, reporters or elected representatives and their publics.
And then as far as, so
Could I just make one point in relation to, because I think you raised a critical point, which is that there's so much of it happening. When you're actually getting to the point where the trolling is now controlling behavior, as a lawyer, my first thought is that this is becoming now a criminal code offense. It's a hate crime. These are prosecutable. But by saying, okay, let's talk to people and engage them, and maybe after the 10th conversation with somebody who is utterly abusive, they will come around. I think it simply normalizes the behavior into something that's acceptable and tolerant. And hey, it's just a few women who are getting, are they so soft they can't take it? They can't take it when they're told they're going to be killed, their children are going to be killed, they're going to be maimed, and they're going to be mutilated. I'm sorry, I fundamentally disagree with that. We have laws in Canada for a reason. The fact that people assume it's okay to talk about this, I'm stunned.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you that if people are being racist or sexist, I do not think that you should engage with them. I don't think that there's a sense in trying to argue with people like that. I absolutely agree. And I think that a lot of the platforms have been completely negligent in their treatment of this, that they haven't treated it, they haven't tried to correct this. And also, police forces haven't treated it.
Correct. I'm saying this is a reportable criminal code offense. If you, hypothetical example, before law school, I was in an apartment building, it was 5 o'clock in the morning, I heard yelling in the parking lot. I looked out, there was a man yelling at the top of his lungs, berating his 8-year-old son. Stupid, you're dumb, you're worthless. Really, loudly, and I called the police, I reported it. Police cars showed up within 3 minutes. This is a reportable offense, and by saying, oh, that's, it's terrible that the social media businesses aren't engaging, they are breaking the law. If you call it the proper term, this is law breaking. It's not just bad business practices. It's not just negligence. This is illegal activity.
And
If you had any of this happening in broadcasting, the stations would actually be shut down. It would be way past, oh, let's investigate, let's hold a hearing. The RCMP would be brought.
I mean, I think what's disturbing about it too is when women have brought this up, especially women in politics, that they face a lot of this. It has, I don't think, been responded to as if it is a legitimate threat in the same way. That, yeah, it is very scary for people, but it seems that people's response to it is that it's not as real. And there is no doubt that it is real.
we need a Desmond Paul article about it. We need
And the platforms tend to advocate responsibility by saying we're not media companies. They say, oh, we're just technology companies and everybody shares what they want to share online. But I think what some of the emerging research is showing is that they do very well function as media companies. And there is an argument to be made to regulate them in the way that you would regulate a broadcaster.
And if I could just interject again, because this is the popular argument, well, we just distribute the stuff. We don't control it. That works right up until, in fact, it's shown that they do have the power to censor. They do have the power to remove content. They do have the power to block people initially and to keep blocking. So the power exists, but as long as the argument is bought that they merely distribute without control, it's easy for them to abdicate legal responsibility.
Yeah, and that's what I think we're saying.
Well, you can see that happening now, for example, what's happening in Germany, France, and the UK. They're starting to introduce laws that put a limit and put some of the responsibility back onto these platforms, saying, actually, you are helping to propagate the fake news, for example, and you don't take them down in 48 hours, you're going to be hit with a huge fine. Guess what? They're stepping up. So what you're seeing now is like what happened to the Credit Reporting Act in the 70s, where in the 70s when people were collecting data about people's credit history, but every time you get turned down for a loan, the banks were prevented from sharing the information as to why they said no. So finally, enough people had, the bank saying, no, you can't get the money for the car loan to go to work. We have the Fair Credit Reporting Act that says, no, when you turn me down, you need to explain to me why, in case there's an error in the record. So I have a chance to fix it. But if you don't tell me why you're turning me down, I'm going to walk away without a job because I can't get that car. We're now at a point where, for the first 10 or so years, where basically it's the wild, wild west. The data is there, we're going to use it. These companies are making the argument that, well, you don't want to put handcuffs on us because you don't want to limit innovation and kill jobs. And our politicians have bought into this. But I think we're now at a point where the public is starting to push back and say, well, you didn't have a conversation with us about collecting all this stuff and how you're going to use it. Like, for example, last year, there's a company in the UK decided to mine Facebook data to look for exclamation mark. And they said, if you use too many exclamation mark in your Facebook posts, we're not going to give you the 50% discount on your car insurance because we think you are going to run red lights because you use so many exclamation mark. And then we're sitting in the lab saying, yeah, and where's the data for that? But they're doing that simply because the data is there, and everybody's trying to figure out, is there a way to have an advantage, a business advantage using these data? But some of this is bunk science. But like I said, because there are no rules now as to what you can and can't do with data, people are just doing it as they please. And I think there's about time for us to start a conversation about whether there should be a fair data collection and usage act that says what is fair for you to collect and what can and can't you use that data for. Right now, like I said, there's no conversation about that.
Well, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada is engaged.
I actually have a question about the software that you were talking about, and I think it's about Luke.
Okay.
So your name is
Priya.
Priya.
Yes.
Yeah. Priya, can you set Luke to include certain words in particular categories?
You can create your own dictionaries as well.
Great.
So we use the standard dictionary. So they've had 4 different iterations of the software. And with the latest version, you can also have access to the last 3 dictionaries. At the same time, you can set your own.
And another one, so you could create a new category?
Yeah.
If you want, so if I wanted to do sense of place
Yes.
and have all the words that are associated.
You could create your own, and then I'm sure there are also, there's a lot of Luke communities on Reddit, for example, where people create dictionaries and then they're willing to share them because it's a software, actually, it comes out of the psychology field. James Pennybacker, the scholar who started the software, was looking at how can we flag individuals with depression or looking at suicide notes, actually, so it's a bit touchy, what it started out. So now there's been a lot of people that are doing online studies in politics or marketing, and they're looking at text analysis, and so the software has evolved over time. So, yes, short answer, yes, you can input your own.
And how expensive is it?
It's, I believe, under $100.
No kidding.
Yes, the copy that I looked up was, I think, around $89, but I could be mistaken.
Well, I might get in touch with you by email if
Sure,
I'm
sure.
lost on this. One more question. If I wanted to use a software, and this might be in one of the other softwares that you talked about, just to highlight for me all the proper nouns, so I wouldn't have to have a coder go through and do this, so that then I can look at the words surrounding that, like the descriptive words and all
So-
that, for any proper noun. Would I be able to do that?
Yes, so basically what happens is that you'll log into the software, you import your data, and you essentially click which categories you want to flag for. And so in your case, you would probably want to look at the linguistic dimensions within which there will be a category for nouns. Or what it would do, it would just take the broader category of linguistics, and you would get the additional data, like verbs or whatever it may be, but then you would just concentrate on nouns, so.
Yeah, so if I wanted to say, they have to be capitalized, like ones that are, proper nouns that are names of people, names of organizations.
I don't know if it would do things with the capitalization.
That's what I was wondering.
So-
Yeah, so Luke might not do it, but it has any of the software that you guys have seen, would it be capable of?
Capitalized, no, because the files,
Yeah.
the file names, the text is, it doesn't flag that.
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can run it through Luke and then export it out in Excel format.
And then you'd have to.
And then you manually basically use Excel
Yeah.
to then manually do that yourself. So this way, at least it's semi-automated.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this
Something
way,
like
you're
that.
not relying 100%, but at least
So
they
get
will
all
do the
nouns
pre-cleaning,
and go
yes.
through the nouns
Right.
And look for the ones with capital letters.
You're just
Right.
using it as a sifter,
Yeah.
Yeah.
to sift through, yeah.
So,
Okay, thank you so much.
Right, what a great conversation, and thank you all for coming. We can continue this over coffee, which is served in the lobby, and then the next session will begin at 10:45. So thank you very much.
Thank you.